there might be a possibility of delivering something through a platform, and it mightn't need to be as drastic as one would think in a situation like this. So I was impressed to see that we found there were a lot of solutions that could be presented within the system we already had. So I think it's important to remember elements of that. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes what we already have works quite well, particularly when it's in reaction to a panic statement. So I think that the next slide there, if possible, please. Yeah, so the student-centered approach to e-learning is one that has to consider the student's previous experience of learning and anticipate the possible difficulties that could arise as a result of that. So something that I think of when I think about this is the four-legged stool. And it's important that IT are able to work with the college. And I think the little quote from IT services proves that they worked alongside the most senior management that, when it comes to assessment and exams in our college. And they saw what would work best there, because whilst IT services have a very strong knowledge on how to deliver the programs and the systems, it's the academics that need to be able to say, well, I actually would rather this was made available. It's important that the library is able to tap into that. In light of the recent developments, we now have a situation where libraries are closed because we can't risk the spread of infection. So it's something else that we need to be able to think into that. So whilst it might seem that only IT and academics are important people in the discussions that are happening around the students' ability to access and to be able to engage in the online learning, it's also important that the student supports are included in this discussion, because sometimes we could think of something like disability or being able to access the content physically itself. A lot of the student supports are the people who anticipate these problems and will be able to advise IT services as to how to best handle that. And then also, students do need to be consulted in this time. And as a student representative, I think that it's important that we ourselves are used to the best of our ability. And it doesn't necessarily have to be going out to all the students and asking for all the information, but it's relying on the student representatives throughout this time to see what might come up throughout the course of online learning and what might be a problem throughout that. So today, take for example, students would be more aware of international students, and with increased internationalization of higher education, it's important that we're able to say, well, students are in the most accessible option here, and it's analysing where we need to make exceptions for the student themselves so that the student is able to access their learning as well. At the moment, we have some real-time exams, and the students that I spoke to in preparation of this, those that were in different time zones found it more difficult to engage, because having to wake up at 4 o'clock for a lecture compared to having 4 o'clock in the morning, compared to have a lecture, affect how the student is able to engage with the content as well. So if we could just pop on to the next slide. And I think something that really adds to the student experience, as I kind of alluded to there, is that staff need to be supported during this time. So staff are now having a new experience, and a lot of teaching staff are experiencing this, is where students typically would have been able to maybe engage with them in the class physically. And this can even happen on a larger scale. We do traditionally think smaller groups are able to create discussion and that students feel more comfortable asking questions, but it does happen in those larger groups or within the larger online sessions. So if it is an interactive lecture, they don't feel as comfortable, or it's harder for them to be able to engage and say, I'd like to ask a question. Maybe that is a question of time. Do they need to get more time to get used to online learning? Because I'm aware that that data was collected after 2 weeks of online learning. But I think that staff need support in that too. They are going to be receiving more questions outside of the classroom through their email, maybe through question platforms that they've set up to go alongside their learning. So it is going to take more time. So there need to be provisions made for that as well. And I think that staff are also having to make difficult decisions. Staff are also from different places around the world. They may need to go back to their home country immediately. They may have to deal with any necessary measures for family members or anything like that. So it is important that we're also able to acknowledge that the staff have limits too. The staff need support in being able to deliver the online content in a time like this. And I think it's something that definitely our college has been leading in, and I can see that compared to maybe other colleges within the country, it's definitely taken to a whole new level. So say that the college, over the few days that they could still have essential staff in, were running workshops to help staff understand how to record their own lectures, how to also put online content into the platforms that were available. And they were doing whatever they could to support the staff member, not only putting up their content at that time or recording their content, but giving them the skills to be able to do that throughout the entire time. So they not only have taught them or helped them in doing the initial task, they've helped them in having the skills to do that task throughout this entire time. And that's incredibly important, because staff are going to encounter issues throughout this time, and they're going to need to be able to solve them in their own homes, because the communication lines won't be as clear. However, that must be said, the IT services have created a whole system for staff to be able to contact them, and there's a whole different kind of communications line for them to be able to deal with any issues and deal with them quickly. Because if there is an issue for a staff member and they're in a class at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, they need to be able to solve it at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, regardless of whether they're in their sitting room or if they're in their lecture hall. And it's also really important to note that IT services have also set this up for our students as well. I think it's important that whilst we assume that this generation has a plethora of IT skills, sometimes people do struggle to access things, and it might be one small issue that needs to be solved for them to be able to engage in the content better, but they need to be able to access the supports to do that. So IT services is possibly, coming out of this is one of the most important tools in delivering an effective online learning experiences. And they know what works best. They've been working throughout this, they're working with issues like this throughout the entire time. They've just never been able to do it at such a high level. So I think it's important that they get the support necessary, needed in this time, but that they're also able to engage with the necessary channels. I think there's another slide just coming up there at the end of this. And I think that's on, yeah. So there's a lot of issues that we were worried about encountering over the course of this period. And I think it's important that the institution that it's not just a case of assessment. Assessment will bleed into, or like online learning will bleed into assessment, and it's important that the learning element fits into the assessment. I think Dominic and Marcus alluded to this earlier on. It is a case of being able to deliver a quality education also, and we need to be able to keep that in mind. It's not so much reacting to the issue at hand, but it's also being able to give students an effective course that they have applied to receive, that is in line with those who have come before them and who will come after them. I think something that is positive to know is that the kind of main European data centres were a huge concern for a lot of the colleges, and they have been performing to a very high standard. That might be as a result of the pandemic that we have at the moment, but I think that it's important that we're able to see that in an emergency situation, these programs will run to the standard that they need to, and that's across European platforms. So that is really good to know. I think something for us, and I think it has been recognised by the international cohort, but it is an issue, particularly for our country, that we have a lot of rural areas, and we have a lot of areas that wouldn't have good internet connection. So whilst we have asked our students to return home, and they have left the city and they're not able to use the library or any of these services, so they can't physically study in the college, they must go home. They haven't been able to access their online learning because they don't have either internet connection in their houses, or that their mobile provider plan isn't large enough. So one of the support services in the college have taken it upon themselves to support students in accessing a better phone plan financially. And it's something like that that needs to be, that is an element of, in this crisis, the college is going to react to that. But looking forward, if we're moving into larger online learning, kind of a larger scale of online learning, do we need to start looking at working with the governments, national internet providers, and making sure that when a student engages in online learning, that they're then ensured access to the online learning as a result? Is that included in the way that they pay for it? So it just raises a question of, how do we ensure that someone can access their learning if internet isn't an issue as well? And it's something that we've definitely encountered here. And I suppose something that, like, coming on from this as well, is we don't have libraries right now, and libraries are very much how our lower income students would access the internet and many other resources. And we ourselves would rely hugely on just having the space in the library, as we have a housing crisis, so we would struggle a lot to actually have students don't have appropriate space to study within their own homes. So it's interesting to see how something like that has actually become such a huge issue in allowing students to access online learning. And I think that after the pandemic, it will be important to maybe look at what was separate and see that what was necessary within the pandemic to, assist our students in having the best experience of e-learning, and then what's necessary after a pandemic in ensuring that our students are able to access e-learning regardless of a global shutdown or not. I think these are kind of the main things that I gained from our students, was a sense that they want to feel supported and they want to be able to communicate with the teaching staff that they have. But if we're able to plan ahead as much as possible, we can mitigate a lot of the huge or the big issues that are posed by e-learning.
Input from both the Chiron side and also from the students' perspective, and also all the measures that you already have in place at Trinity College. So I can already see that we have quite a lot of questions from our participants' sides that we can include in the panel discussion. But maybe before we start with those questions, I will start with a general one that I already noted down while you were presenting. And you were referring a lot to active participation, interactivity, co-creation of learning within e-learning as a very important parameter of successful e-learning. So my question is, how does this look in practice? So I would like to ask Dominic first, and then afterwards Laura, from both the different perspectives.
So I think the idea is essentially just, if you think of this kind of interaction, it is quite a helpful thing just to think about, what does the normal learning experience look like at a university? And one way that you get this kind of interaction and co-creation is you give teams of students an assignment, and they go away and they design the assignment. They maybe do a case study, or they look at a particular problem and try and find a solution to that problem, and they present that. The reason why I think we try and focus on that so much when we're talking about EdTech or digital learning is because you often forget that side of the learning experience. So you can do it in the same way, though. You just have to think of those kind of assignments that you can give to students. And building on that as well, you can also say, and Marcus already mentioned, one way to get students also to work together and to have the interaction is you say, well, okay, well, so we have different teams who've done something, and now we also do peer assessment between the teams. And so it's not so difficult, really. It's always, I think the most important thing is just not to get kind of, think that what is normal learning is somehow completely different. But as soon as we put it in digital, you can use exactly the same ways you think of the learning we're used to, and then see how you can apply that with different techniques, but with the same kind of result and the same kind of learning experience within the digital environment. And of course, when you think about this, we mentioned this kind of straw man idea of what we call PDF learning. There you can see if digital learning is just thought about as, oh, nobody's on campus, I better push the knowledge to them in a different way, then you're not thinking at all about the other parts which are part of the university experience.
Thank you very much for your reflection. Laura?
Yeah, I think that you really hit it on the head there, Dominic. I think from speaking to some students, I had a few students who have PhDs teaching them. So obviously this has been quite difficult for them to get their heads around so quickly and to adjust to new forms of teaching. But one in particular was using so many of the kind of additional elements that I think are almost a gimmicky response to this question is that, there are elements on online platforms and they mightn't necessarily work best. But I think that what Dominic says there, it's literally a question of looking at what you did within the classroom, within the physical learning development, and how did that work best, and becoming a little bit more creative in how we deliver it. but it doesn't necessarily have to be a specific box created on Blackboard or whichever platform just to be able to deliver that.
Thank you very much.
definitely
I
agree
think
with
that
that.
already has quite some overlaps with a few questions that were posted via Menti regarding how can you assess like e-learning after completing a course, or also midterm exams, final exams. So Markus, maybe you can reflect on potential assessment methods. How much assessment is necessary? Oh, I think you are muted right now. So Nina, could you unmute Markus?
Yes, I unmuted
Okay.
myself.
Okay.
I unmuted myself now. So how much assessment is needed? First of all, I would like to get rid of one of the assumptions that was not explicitly mentioned in the misconceptions about e-learning, because when it comes to assessments and the opportunity of e-assessments or digital assessment or whatever, it is always assumed that students are trying to cheat much more when they're in a digital environment or when they're by themselves than, for example, if they are sitting in a classroom with a teacher in front of them looking over them. So first of all, students are, everybody, maybe put it like this, is cheating in an exam if possible. Most people do. So this is something that happens in both in the digital realm and in the offline realm. So this is true in both cases. Second thing is that many kind of exams or assessment that are happening, if you're studying, for example, in humanities, you would submit kind of a paper. And if this can be done the same way online and offline. I mean, anyways, these papers are submitted via attachments. So in this regard, there is no much difference. And I would really like to repeat again what Laura and Dominic has said before. If you take a look at what is good learning and good teaching offline, most of these pieces also apply in the online world. So next stage would be the pieces that we were talking about, peer assessments. Peer assessments have a number of advantages. What are these? First of all, they are scalable. That means that the more students or the more you assess these pieces. The next thing is you get a feedback from somebody who is equally an expert in the field like you are. So they have certain expectations to what this should look like. And the next piece is also you will also become an assessor of another person's submission. So you will take a totally different look at on how you yourself produce it. And you will also take a different look from the side of how would I assess somebody else's pieces. So the learning in this regard is much more multi-angled as soon as you include peer reviewing. So this is a huge advantage. And I think one should not underestimate the chances of these. And I don't think that the assumption that one student would help another and give easy grading is true as much as I think the entire aspect of cheating or academic misconduct is in digital realm more relevant than offline. And then we have, of course, the much more advanced techniques of online assessment. Online assessments are also done at many universities already in pools where you go at a certain time, you sit down at a certain computer, you log in with your ID, and you do this online. But the same thing can be done non-time bound, means you come into a computer center, do your assessment at any time. And if you do it completely online, flexible, that means that you can also identify yourself, not necessarily by showing your passport at the entrance or your ID to a clerk or to somebody a survey person, but you can either identify yourself with a photo. This of course has some GDPR issues, but a photo should be possible, and people can still be tracked. So from very low control, very interactive pieces like peer assessments to high-end tech solutions with continuous video control, keyboard logging, eye tracking. So there is the full range of assessments possible, and whatever you need to feel safe and whatever you think documents the learning outcome best can be applied.
Thank you very much. And how does it look at Trinity College, Laura?
Yeah, I think that particularly in terms of the pandemic, we've had to make changes to assessment, and I think that that's something that when it's an emergency situation, when it comes to online learning, there needs to be procedures put in place. So a lot of colleges, academic council, or the relevant body that makes decisions for assessment and academic marking should definitely take into consideration that at these times you will have to have different measures. So I saw that there was a question there relating to if you don't have any access to any of these materials. This is a pandemic, and likely this pandemic will then ease, and people will be able to get access to things like libraries, your actual college library, your local library, and all these places allow you to access online learning. So you would immediately be like need to be able to defer. You need to be able to say, I cannot do my exams right now. I need to be able to do them later. And that's something that also needs to be put in place alongside the online learning, is thinking about the experience of the user as well. As an individual and as a human being, we think of, students as 18 to 24-year-olds, but they're also parents. They're also, mature students. There's people with different scenarios there as well who will need to actually take the assessment time to be able to look after family members or younger children or different stuff like that in a time like this. So it is important that the assessment is able to become flexible. And as we've been saying throughout this, look at what's been happening before. So say we have had online submission for essays, and then you also have multiple choice questions. Those two are things that always happen in Trinity. They're just going to happen maybe a little bit more frequently, and you mightn't have an exam now instead of maybe 2 MCQs and a essay. And I think that helps as well, because the students are used to that. So they're not as daunted by the experience as well. They know how to do this. They've done it frequently. Now it's just a little bit more than what they were used to. So I think that's good as well. It grounds the student, helps them realize, I have done this. I understand what that means. I also understand what that means in terms of my own grades, my academic career, and my progression throughout college as well.
Thank you very much. I would like to go to the next question, which some of the participants have raised, and it's about how can I improve my learning experience when being confronted with a bad offer? And I would like to rephrase that question a little bit. So how can students actively shape their learning experience and give feedback and engage if the course doesn't meet their initial thought what it would? So maybe Laura, again, from your perspective, as you already said, you're quite engaged as student representatives.
I think the most important thing that you can do, so say if you're a student representative, it is quite hard for you to be able to point the student back to the person that they have received their education from. And I think it's important that academics are being held to account during this time, or if you've paid for an online course and it's purely through online, you need to be able to contact the proper representative. So it would usually be the course coordinator that I would recommend to contact, is to make recommendations, be it this didn't work well and the IT merely needs to be changed, but you need to be able to say that somewhere. So I would definitely recommend contacting the head of the course or the school. And then I think that it's also important that if there are any technological developments that need to happen, that you also contact the IT department, so that they're also aware that is something that needs to be worked on. For student representatives, though, I would definitely recommend using this time to compile methods of engaging with your students to see how they've been feeling about this whole experience, or even just being able to take information from the students and lobby on their behalf regarding some of this, because it will cause problems, and it's important that students aren't going to be penalized for maybe a lecturer not being able to access online learning as well as others.
Thank you very much. Before we continue, just a quick remark. So for those of you who are logged in Menti, you can also upvote questions if you have the same question. So I will also take that into account, because we are running to the end of this meeting. So yeah, but before we go to the next question, I would like to ask Dominic about his reflection from the Chiron side about gaining feedback from participants.
I like this question because I think there's two sides to it. The first side is exactly as Laura said, and I think it's important for everyone to realize, or just for everyone to be open to the fact that the situation where everyone is trying very fast to find solutions that somehow work for everyone, And I think it's important for everyone, including the university, the lecturers, but also the students, to realize this is, you know, everyone's exploring. It's a bit of an experiment. We have to make sure that this communication works as well, so that there is enough feedback loops. It's as much on the students to do this, and they're supported by the student organization, as it is for well to be looking into this. Of course, students are also in situations very often where they're also not happy with their traditional learning situation. And one way they get around it, and of course this is part of it, is they can work, or they can cooperate with other students in the same course. And then those things missing they can do as part of their own learning. So if they're saying, okay, interactivity is terrible, then of course it's great to say, okay, well, it wasn't the lecturer has been ignoring this situation, but let's set up our own kind of working groups, the kind of thing that you would normally do when you meet your friends or colleagues at the library. So you can do those things yourself. So none of us should be passive in this situation. But the other side to the issue, and that's, I think, rather interesting, is, and this is going to be a bigger issue for university management and for politics, is what about if the students start realizing, hey, I could actually be learning this digital thing from another university, and the quality is much better. And I'm hoping, as well as many people, that we will have, particularly in the summer semester coming up, enough space that those kind of things are not purely disadvantageous, so that universities maybe do rethink their recognition patterns, so that maybe it is possible that you can go and learn at other places, because that's what we've been wanting all along. And so it could be a nice development, but of course at the moment it's quite risky for the individual student, because they might not get it recognized. But I think it is naturally going to start happening much more.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So there was also one question regarding recognition procedures and how likely it is to have a course recognized. So we will not much focus on that in this webinar.
Because I think nobody knows the answer. I think everyone knows it's one of the biggest issues going forward.
Yeah, and also we will have a webinar soon, so the series will continue and will also cover other aspects, and one episode will be specifically on recognition, tackling all these questions related to it. Then also I saw one question which was regarding data privacy. So maybe Markus, you could reflect on this part, if there's a big issue of data protection and how platforms can take this into account. We cannot hear you. I think if you cannot unmute yourself, then okay.
No, okay, no, I am unmuted. We are currently on Zoom. Data protection is a big issue for all these aspects. So this can be tackled on several levels. I have to admit that I'm not a data protection specialist, but I can tell you what we at Kiron are doing for this. For assessments, for example, just to pick maybe this up very, very much from the beginning, because the question of data protection also is of course, a big problem for online assessments. But as an example, we can find workarounds for online identification without being in the need of connecting relevant data sets. Like, for example, if we do this with one of the provider that comes from Spain, who does it via photo recognition. So this person can identify that it's the same person taking the exam. And once you get a certificate for the specific course, this will be issued together with a photo. And to read this photo is comparably much more difficult, and to compare with other databases like the name and your birth date, for example. Next thing, of course, is that servers within the European Union should be used. And of course, the user should have full rights over her and his data. That means that the user at all times needs to be informed about which data are stored, how long they are stored, what for they are stored, and that the users have very detailed laid out rights to delete parts of their information whenever requested.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And maybe just to add very briefly to that, because I think this is really a case that it's actually on both sides. It's on the side of companies such as Kiran and those companies such as Zoom, to be much more transparent, as Marcus says, and actually to really have the proper procedures for GDPR. On the other hand, one can say in a certain way there has been a good development. Sometimes this argument of data privacy has been used now to block ways of moving forward. And I think so we need to look at how can we move forward, how can we offer these kind of digital online learning offers so that it, as Marcus says, fulfills all the data privacy regulations and is very transparent at that, and then can be accepted by the administration, for example, of universities or data protection regulations. I think probably all of us have been ignoring this issue very much over the past 10 years. So maybe all of us become a bit clearer about these issues. Of course, one thing we're beginning to see is things like proctoring, which is what Marcus was talking about, where you're trying to prove a certain person is doing an exam. That can be really a huge step forward, a huge step in the direction of surveillance, which none of us want to go to. And so we have to be very clear, where are the barriers here? So hopefully this brings up this debate much clearer than it has been maybe in the past years, where it's mostly been discussed by legal experts and tech experts. And I think we need more people in this space to be discussing it and finding the right solutions.
Thank you very much. I think this topic is so complex. We could do an individual webinar about just this topic. As we are running a little bit out of time, I would like to ask one final question. And this one is about the post-corona lockdown period. So I would like to shift a little bit away from the problem orientation that we are right now facing and more to an opportunity-led approach. So from your perspective, what can we learn and how can we profit from this situation right now in the future? Maybe Laura, you can start.
Yeah, I think it's raised some great questions in terms of what is a student's rights, what is a student entitled to at any one set time. And every student should essentially have the right to a space where they can study effectively. And we don't have that. So I think it does raise a question of, we do owe our students more, and there is more we can be doing for our students across the world. Just because even as any college that will have international students will see, everyone's different experience once they go back home is going to be different as well. But I think that it shows great promise as well, because we have been trying to incorporate online learning, not just for moving along with the times and having better equipped graduates, but also being able to tackle the environmental impact that travel and research is having on our climate, and being able to move ourselves forward to this position to be able to recruit students internationally, to be able to engage in international research through online platforms is so important. And it's also so important for our disabled students. So many find themselves having to repeat years or having to go through college for a longer period of time just because they're disadvantaged from not being able to physically be in a space. So I think that this is a really exciting time, and I'm really, really excited to see what happens after this. And I think that's nice, because it can be bring a lot of people down and we can feel very stressed, but it's nice to know that there is a whole world of possibility about to happen once all of this is over. So I'm very excited, and I do hope people take this as an opportunity rather than just a lesson that was learned once.
And from the provider side, Dominic, what do you think? How can you profit and your students profit from the current situation?
Yeah, I think, yes, our students can certainly profit from it, because our students come to us, they learn on our platform, and then one of the biggest issues for them is how do they get what's learned recognized by by the formal education sector, because we're really on the periphery of that. So I think this is a great move forward for us. Also, there'll be more acceptance and understanding for what it means to study online. I think, you know, you asked the question before, you know, are we, I think actually it was Nina, are we now further than, or what are we going to become, get further along the line than we were before, or not so far? I think the big worry in a way is there's a lot of experimentation happening now, and everyone understands we need this experimentation just to kind of get things over the line. But I think we all have to think very strategically about this, and we have to try and learn lessons as quickly as we can, so that we do focus on the good things and we focus on the problems and try and solve those. Because the worst thing that could happen is after COVID, everyone says, God, wasn't that terrible? Let's go back to what we had before. Because we come back to exactly the issues that Laura mentioned, which is higher education isn't inclusive. It has a lot of preconditions of taking part, which exclude certain groups in our society, and digital learning can help there. So I'm kind of a mixed bag at the moment of whether we're positive or negative, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you very much. I think these were the perfect closing words for this webinar. And I would really, really like to thank you as experts that you shared your views and your experience with us and all the participants. And also thank you participants for joining this webinar, posting your questions, and contributing to this panel discussion in the end. I hope you got some valuable information. And as already mentioned before, this webinar series will continue, as we already noticed there are so many more questions that need to be answered regarding digitalization of learning. So we will announce the upcoming webinar soon, and they will include topics like assessment in a more particular way, in a more specific way, and also the recognition procedures or attempts that you can use to increase the chances for academic recognition. So the invitations will follow, and we will also share the recording of the webinar with you. And in case you have any questions, feel free to contact us or leave a comment in the chat, or contact us by any means. So thank you all for joining, and have a good day, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.